This, my 70th topic of the Unlocking the Soul podcast, requires my strongest trigger warning yet. One Reddit user recently described this idea as causing him to experience something extremely weird and unnatural, so terrifying that anytime he thinks about it, he experiences a brief dissociation with reality. And his life was never quite the same again. That said, let's proceed. Your terrifying reality, an avatar in the void, the biosimulation. I want you to look at the floor of your room. Tap it with your foot. It feels solid enough, right? But there is nothing beneath you. Whatever you consider yourself to be, the you is currently floating in a silent black void, made of basically nothing solid at all. The room, the walls, your hands, your brain are emptiness, nothingness. You're being tricked into sensing and feeling, well, anything at all, by how your mind interprets just a few frequencies of energy. But that's an illusion. If that sounds terrifying, wait till you hear the reason why we perceive it this way. Today we're looking at the ultimate simulation theory, where the programmer, the player, and the hardware are all you. But first, subscribe and like this video to help my podcast thrive, and please find me on the new community I set up on School to discuss further. So this isn't just some late-night dorm room philosophy session. This idea is deeply rooted in modern physics. Every atom is 99.999% empty space. If an atom were the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be a marble in the center, and the electrons would be tiny gnats in the highest bleachers. Everything in between is nothingness. So we feel solidity only because of electromagnetic repulsion. Your chair isn't touching you. Its atoms are just pushing yours away with energy fields. As physicist Sir James Jean said, the universe begins to look a lot more like a great thought than a great machine. So if solid matter is mostly empty space, what are we actually touching? What are we seeing? Well, this is where it gets really mind-bending. Quantum physics suggests that at the most fundamental level, what we perceive as particles are actually just excitations in quantum fields, essentially ripples or waves of energy. And it's our brains, these incredible organic supercomputers, that take these energy signals and translate them into the vibrant, noisy, tactile experiences that we like to call reality. Light isn't inherently bright until our brain interprets photons hitting the retina. Sound isn't loud until our brains process air pressure waves. Even the feeling of touching something solid, it's just electromagnetic repulsion between the atoms of your hand and the atoms of the object interpreted by your brain as solidity. As physicist Niels Bohr once said, everything we call real is made of things we cannot regard as real. Pretty unsettling, right? It suggests that the colors, the sounds, the textures of our world are not inherent properties of the universe, but rather a sophisticated simulation generated by our own minds. And if the universe is a vast ocean of energy, then what we call matter is just a localized surge, a wave crest in that ocean. And these waves, these energy packets, are constantly interacting, creating the illusion of a tangible, solid world. So how do we connect to these energy packets? Well, a new theory called orchestrated objective reduction proposes that consciousness arise from quantum computations within the microtubules in our neurons. It's a quantum mind theory explaining how consciousness happens. We've even found evidence that the way anesthesia disrupts consciousness and makes us black out is by inhibiting the vibration of these tubules. So literally disconnects us from consciousness that we tune into. So this is actually support for the idea that our brain is something more like a radio receiver, something coordinating with the other brains that we interact with, tuning into consciousness rather than creating it, tuning also into the so-called matrix of shared experiences and even the rules of physics that drive this universe. And this idea also touches on the famous observer effect in quantum mechanics, where the act of observing a particle can actually change its state. Some interpretations suggest that consciousness itself plays a role in collapsing these probability waves, creating the definitive reality that we experience. If everything is just energy and interpretation, does anything truly exist? Are we just complex biological machines experiencing a consensual hallucination? But I think there's also a profound beauty in it. It elevates the role of consciousness to an incredibly powerful position, suggesting that our internal world is actively shaping our external one. We are essentially biological VR headsets. We take a chaotic, empty void of vibrating energy and turn it into a beautiful, coherent world. But why go through all that trouble? Well, this brings us to the radical version of simulation theory. Usually, we think of simulations as a computer built by aliens or future humans. But what if the computer is part of what we call spirituality, the spiritual plane? Many metaphysical researchers, like Dolores Cannon, suggest that we are actually etheric beings, souls existing in a dimension of pure energy. In that state, everything is known. There's no surprise, no touch, no weight, nothing as we know it, nothing to truly experience growth. These souls, our souls, designed a physical simulation. But let's take a step back. If you believe God, or all that is, who built the universe, he built it to experience all things. Well, we're part of that plan through which God experiences this, the physical plane. To make the simulation work, to get the richest experiences of love, loss, trauma, redemption, we had to implement this veil of amnesia. And think about it. If you played a video game knowing exactly how it ended, then you couldn't be hurt. What all the other players were thinking, the game would be pretty boring. You wouldn't grow from playing it. So we agreed to forget our true nature as infinite energy beings so that we could experience the physical plane. We traded our omniscience for the ability to feel a cool breeze, the sting of a heartbreak, or the taste of an orange. Things that don't exist in the realm of pure spirit, but experiences that will eventually upload to God when we're done with this incarnation cycle. That's when we reunite with our higher self, our oversoul, through the ascension process, which I cover extensively in my episodes 14 and 15. So yes, it could be terrifying to think that we are floating in a void of empty space, but it's empowering to think that the void is a blank canvas. We aren't victims of a cold, empty universe. We are the artist who brought the paint. You aren't the person having a spiritual experience. You're a soul running a high-definition simulation of personhood just to see what it feels like. So next I would like to consider some writings from the Jane Roberts book, The Nature of Personal Reality, where she channels the advanced being Seth. He talks extensively about how humans are using our brains as a filter to perceive a very small percentage of the sense data that's coming into them. And this filter is a way that we construct which version of reality from our infinite probable realities to choose from that we experience. At one point he says, "The physical constitution of the body follows your beliefs, and so all of its sense data will faithfully mirror the beliefs that direct its activity. In certain terms, hypnosis is simply an exercise in the alteration of beliefs. It only too clearly shows that sense experience follows expectations." He says elsewhere that in terms of the sense of the I that you possess is the result of constantly emerging probable identities, given continuity in time through the physical apparatus of the body with its built-in intervals of nerve reactions. And then he goes further, talking about the infinite probable selves to choose from, saying the you that you presently conceive yourself to be represents the emergence into physical experience of but one probable state of your being, who then directs corporeal life and frames and defines all sense data. When your ideas about yourself change, so does your experience. And he goes on to give examples about how a change of identity and a change of expectations really goes through past and present and future to change all the different sense experiences that you remember, the ones that are salient in your conscious mind. So you can imagine someone being convinced that they're no longer worthy of respect and maybe that they experience abuse. Then you can see them going back into their memory and thinking of all the times they were abused and bringing that to the forefront to kind of construct a version of their experience consistent with that value, where someone else might be shown a lot of respect and they may go back and dismiss examples of abuse in their past as inconsequential and instead elevate the experiences where they were praised, and those become the formative memories that they use to link together to create this ego sense of who I am at this moment. So you can see how the experience has infinite versions of reality just within your own lifetime, your own memories that are currently in your mind, based on which 1% or 10th of a percent or 100th of a percent of those experiences that you remember and retain versus those that you suppress and forget. But next I want to speak with spiritualist and friend of the show, Alexander Verakutra. He joined us about 2 weeks ago in the episode 32, where we talked initially about aphantasia and the ability for the mind to visualize imagery during meditation. But it was a fascinating, winding conversation from there that I think you'll enjoy if you check out episode 32. So Alexander, thank you for joining.
I'm a big fan of the law of one and trying to understand what oneness means with all the parameters we have right now. And when I think of darkness and light and the abyss and the void, what do we actually mean? Because there's some part of me that likes to think of the dark canvas of oneness where everything is possible, like potential, and not seeing it as polarized as something negative, because sometimes there's an association with darkness and void and being stuck in it and being completely invisible, but that's coming at it from a perspective of people who live in a visual world. So that's kind of logical when you think about it that way. But does darkness have to be negative? And is it simply how our world functions between the visible and the invisible? And maybe there's a connection, and perhaps there are some elements that we're not able to pinpoint right now. But if we explore darkness, seeing it as love energy instead of like negative energy, there might be something to it.
The word darkness is prejudicial because really you could say that the lack of a third density physical plane around us, and that there's so little around us, means that the spirit world and the world of love and our ultimate home is really close. It's connected. It's all around us. We're connected to it. There's a brief, thin structure that we call this simulation, the visual thing that we're experiencing right now. But we're 99.999% in the spirit world, connected with our souls. This veil of amnesia is really thin by that accounting.
Okay, let's say we're all gods in the sense that we are everything, the universe, when we're outside of our identity human experiences. So it means that when you incarnate, you decide to forget everything. That's brutal. That's really brutal. It's pretty courageous to be able to do that. So kudos to us to be incarnated and have gone through this amnesia. And then I'd like to think of the fact that remembering etymologically means to put members back on. So it's something that you've lost and then you're just putting back on. It's not actually something that's new. It's something you decided to forget. And when you think of it that way, it gives it an interesting twist, I think.
Had the video game available to us that would allow for temporary amnesia, we would totally do it.
There's movie. I think there's probably movies and series or sci-fi about that. Well, The Matrix is kind of that in a way too, but a different form. But yeah,
it's against our will in that case. But
yeah, look at all the VR sets that are out. Well, it's interesting in Minecraft. There's creator mode or there's survival mode.
Right.
I'm like, okay, there must be something behind this that we're not getting as humans. Maybe like most of humans are in survival mode. I think that could be pretty accurate, but can we go into creator mode? That would be more fun, actually, right?
Well, and there raises the question, does just knowing about our spiritual truths and being awakened, is that sort of the equivalent of being in creative mode, because you no longer feel like death is the end? You don't really need to fight to stay alive because he'll just keep on responding. The idea that the third density experience that we have been built is it's like the bare bones of what could be called the physical reality. I mean, there's a lot of nothing there.
Yeah. Well, there's also, I think, what comes to mind is a saying, when a tree falls, you don't hear it, or something like that. So, which is essentially saying that whatever is outside of your environment in the moment doesn't exist. Essentially, it's some form of this, and that's kind of it's something that your brain has a hard time with, because our definition of real is assuming that yes, what's in front of us is real, and what's outside of us that we know of, like politics, environment, cities, and everything, our friends who are not here with us at the moment, are still real, but they're also not here now. So then there's the question of what is rendered by your reality, what is rendered by theirs, and how do people intersect? And I think it has to do with some form of archetypal dance we have. And this archetypal dance we have aligns with your frequency of making progress within your own inner journey. And the outer world is a reflection of that. But it's kind of a hard point to measure, to evaluate, to make sense of. But it all goes down to the focus you have on whatever is happening, and how to make sense of it. And I like to think of the world as extremely symbolic, and that is how I read the world now. I don't see it as literal elements. If I see a lot of, let's say, red in my day, then I will tie it to an element that's pointing to me having to work on my root chakra, which is red too, for example. And if same analogy for like shamanism and animals, if I go and walk in a park and I see a flock of crows, then why is that showing up for me now? And then you think of the symbolism with crows, and it has to do with, well, high intelligence and transformational energy, and working as packs also. So there's a lot going on, and then you can reflect on that and see how it ties to other elements in your life. When we see movies like Matrix, or Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, there's always like a sub layer, a dream layer, a simulation layer that you have to escape. And I try to think, okay, well, why do we need to escape it? We, with the soul contract stuff, we set up to be here. And we know that according to all the other elements, we'll be going back to source at some point, but we're right now. What do we make of it? And I think the underlying part about the simulation theory is that there is some form of algorithmic pattern to the universe. And when you think of it that way, it's not something bad. It's just a logical layout to how things function. And I think because we're taught that most things are random or outside of yourself, there is no clear, certain pattern to what's going on in our reality. So when you see the randomness that's been embedded in our society, and then when you go to simulation, which is like super logical and mathematical, you kind of have to connect those dots. And that's like two belief systems that have inherent oppositional forces or something like that. So I like to think that if I'm able to understand the rules within the simulation or the algorithm, then it's just playing a game and understanding the rules of the game as you're playing. And I don't see that as negative. I see it as empowering, but it has also to do with some identity shedding and belief system transmutation and alchemy.
It's almost as hard to fathom as, say, you're watching the game, someone playing Pac-Man, and it's so structured. The walls don't move. You know exactly. There's like 10 rules you could describe that probably govern the entire game. And then looking at something like Minecraft and saying, how could that possibly be a simulation? There's so infinite number of things you can do, but it really does have an algorithm and a set of rules. And yes, it constructs things on the fly, but it does those by rules. And it looks like an infinite world, but it it obviously isn't. It just has different combinations of known elements that are all programmed. And I think that's what you're describing. Like our minds are having a hard time with the chaos around us. As how could there possibly be rules to this randomness? Well, someone in the 1970s would have said that about Minecraft.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating in video games is more than often when you die, you respawn at the beginning. Well, you can tie that to reincarnation, right?
Yeah. You get to the next level up, and then you get to respawn at a further point. Well, that's what our souls do, right?
So this video game analogy is pretty interesting. Also, it feels like a societal fractal image of maybe what's going on and that we're onto something and that it's developed so much. That's kind of a clue, I think.
It's interesting that video games have become such a part of culture. They feel so normal. And like you said, I mean, we don't even bat an eye at the ability of, oh, you have 5 lives and you have to get through 10 levels. And that seems so normal. And then we talk about souls doing the same thing. And people are like, oh, that's satanic. That's blasphemy.
In my pursuit of understanding how this could function and tying this to Dolores Cannon material, the Law of One material, but also Conversation with Gods material, which is a really interesting channeled book, is that there are multiple layers, and our egocentric human mind often says, all right, it's the body, the mind, the soul, and the soul is in the body. That's a common belief that I've come across a few times. And going through all these researches, I was like, okay, it's actually mind, body, soul. And your body is in your soul. And when I heard that phrase, that's from Conversation with Gods, it kind of blew my mind. And I was like, well, what does that mean? So that means that, so it feels like the soul was a spark inside of us, but it's actually more. And then I was like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. If the soul is something grander, then it would be something that we're inside and not the other way around. So that's the first part I thought it was interesting. The second part is that there is an inversion with the mind and the body. And I think that when we talk about simulation theories and how reality can be rendered through, I know, the observer's effect and so on and so forth, then putting the mind first is actually smart in the sense that if it renders your reality, it's the beginning of a lot of elements. And when you think of your experience as a human, it all goes down to your mind. And then there's your body, of course, but it all goes down to your mind. And when we're sleeping, our body's shut off, our mind's shut off, and soul comes in or something like that. But I like the inversion of body, mind, body as like a hierarchy to reflect upon that. And so that ties to the law of one. The law of one is big on the mind comes first and then the body, not the other way around.
And interestingly, you said that the soul is in the body, not the soul is in the mind. But what's that connection then?
That's a great question. The way the law of one functions is they explain that the 7 layers of reality, or the chakras, or the dimensions, or densities, a lot of this apply to the mind, applying to the body, and apply to the soul. And it's like, okay, I thought it was just the body. And the fact that they add this like layer where mind, body, soul has sub elements that really got me thinking. And so what I understand is there's within the simulation parameters, there must be some form of alignment of understanding and aligning mind, body, and soul. But what does that mean? And I'm still on that quest, so I don't have the answer to that. And so the way I like to see my human interactions now is, okay, my mind is my consciousness. It's all the psychological elements. It's all the pattern recognition. That's how it works. Then my body is my body, right? And if there's something going on in my body, I try to tie it with my mind. I don't know, for example, and this is big in shamanism. Once you're an alcoholic and you drink a lot, it affects your liver. And the liver is associated with anger. And for example, so smoking affects your lungs, and the lungs represent sadness. And if you have some of that going on, it's hard to get out of a judgmental element of it's bad, and simply see it as information to build upon and be like, okay, there must be something in my psyche that must be unresolved with perhaps my past where I have unresolved anger or unresolved sadness. So that's how I connect the mind with the body. When I get signs from my body, try to tie it with the symbolism associated with it, and then connect it with the mind, and then the soul. So for me, this is a big stretch. To me, the soul could possibly be my outer world, and the beauty of it is that that would mean that you are part of my soul, and everyone I interact with is part of my soul as a giant oneness. And so when I think of my children, I think of them as a reflection of my progress as a soul through them. And so it's interesting to see my kids go through the same challenges I had when I was a child, and see how I can help them transmute this element and in return benefit from that mirror.
So with my background in IT system design and building dashboards and things for executives, your body is doing a trillion things at this very moment. It's mostly at the cellular level, but some things at the tissue level, some at the organ level, some at the system level. And most of that is happening without our even consciously being aware of it, of course. So even breathing during this conversation, it takes a coordination of countless numbers of participants within our body, as well as like a multinational corporation here. But the mind is sort of like the CEO's dashboard and control center of getting critical information. So all of a sudden, one of your tissues in your bottom of your foot starts hurting because you stepped on something. It sends an alert up to the brain. That's like the CEO getting notified of a potential, lawsuit or something. And then it can deal with that and put it, until it gets taken care of. And then also can think strategically, just like a CEO would, decide, I want to get in shape, so I'm going to get on a multi-month exercise routine. Like that's, long-term thinking. Nothing else in the body has that strategic thought process. I mean, I guess maybe that's even not true. If you break a bone, I guess your bones could say over the next 6 weeks, I'm going to heal. But your brain can even think longer term and more strategically. And that's kind of all it is. I mean, it has to filter out the vast majority of sensory input so it can focus on the big picture, just like a CEO saying, I have people to handle that. I'm not going to get bogged down with personnel issues while I'm, trying to get my next acquisition figured out.
Also, I watched your documentary, Unlocking Your Soul, a second time, this time with my partner,
Oh my God.
who's also into QHHD. So we had a lot of fun with that. It's watching it a second time made me realize all the effort you put into gathering all of these elements, which, I think I told you the first time, it was pretty impressive, but looking at it with someone else who's also into this was also very insightful, because you gather a lot of different and bring and consolidate a lot of information, which is, I think, a real topic in this spiritual world, because more than often it's like, okay, you have astrology, and that's spirituality, and that's like something in and of itself. Then you can have shamanism on one side, that's something else. Then you have numerology, geometry, crystals. And it's like, well, wait a minute, chakras, whatever. How does this all work together, actually? And so that's exactly what you're doing in those in that documentary, and with the analysis behind it, which is what we're missing today. It's a systemic view of a phenomenon that everyone's interested in, that possibly they've experienced in multiple forms, ghosts, insights, internal dialogue, hallucinations, lucid dreaming, whatever you want to call it. And people can't quite tie it to something that actually makes sense as a system. It's more of it's real, it happens, but we have no clue what it means.
Is the veil starting to thin for you? Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a moment where reality felt a little too rendered. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep exploring the edges of the known. Find us on School to join the community discussion.